A wonderful good evening. I have to say I'm a bit surprised about the small amount of people here tonight. I know we've got a couple of people on Zoom. Welcome. This presentation will be later on YouTube, so the information will be available in the future. And I've already asked, the presentations are it can be distributed. So should you want the presentation, please don't hesitate to ask me. So today's topic is water. And I know that the rainfall, especially in the catchment area of Van Bachtam, was utterly catastrophic this year. I believe we've got something like 26% of 25. Oh, great. So we're now at 25% water level of the Van Bachtam, which for me raises the question, how are we going to get through to 2024? And I was very happy to accept the proposal from Piet Smit and Dieter Tolke to give a presentation on this topic today. So Piet Smit is the chairperson of the USBMC. Ha, got it right. What exactly that says, he's going to tell to you just now. And Dieter Tolke is also a member of the USBMC, but today he's going to be in his capacity as a representative of City of Windhoek, going to tell us about what happened, what they've done, what the plans are, and so on. And I think, without further ado, Pete, I would love you to explain to us why USBMC, how USBMC, what the role of them is, and yeah, how we're going to get through the next year.
Thank you. Okay, so the USBMC is the acronym for the Upper Swakop Basin Management Committee. It is a structure that was put together under the Water Resources Management Act that was already passed through Cabinet in 2013, but still is not enacted. But we have a constitution that was signed by the minister back then, and we've been operational for about 6 years, I think, Dieter. Of which 4 years I wasn't part of it, and the last 2 years I have been part of it. 3 years actually, but that COVID year kind of, we don't see that as one of them. Yeah, so we're going to talk about long and short, medium and short-term interventions regarding water. We've just heard that we've had a really bad rainfall season. My part of the presentation will focus on the Swakop Upper Omatako Basin Integrated Water Resource Management Plan. It's quite a mouthful, but basically it's a water management plan that looks at all the different water sources that are available and how we can integrate it to make sure that we have better water resilience for the central area of Namibia. Some of you might have heard of the CAN, the CAN, so it's the Central Area of Namibia. So we're going to talk about that as well. So that last part of the white thing. It was working earlier. Oh, okay, so it's not presenting. Let's just do this. Apologies to the people on Zoom. We're just having a technical difficulty here. Okay, so there we go. So I'm just going to talk about the integrated management plan. I'm going to talk a bit about future and current resources that were listed in that plan. So I'm going to refer to a plan. Unfortunately, this plan is 2 years old already. And that in itself, in terms of the action taken from what came out of the plan, probably speaks for itself. In the plan, there was some demand modeling, and some of the outcomes of the demand modeling we will discuss, and I think that will touch quite strongly on what Dieter will be presenting. And then the strategic action plan that came out of that, and I think it's important to maybe focus on the word action, which not a lot of it was taken. Okay, so the plan was developed by SCE Consulting Engineers and Big and Kumba. They were consulting firms that were contracted by the Ministry of Agriculture, Water and Land Resettlement. What's the LR again? And it was published in 2020 already. So like I said, it's 2 years old. There's quite a bit of stakeholder engagement. They went out of their way to engage people in difficult times. So this was right in the COVID pandemic and a lot of lockdowns and restraints on movement. And they went out of their way. There was a bit of delay. That's why it was only published in 2020. The deadline was actually 2019. It gives a summary of plans that were tabled by NamWater and by the ministry at that stage. And it looked at the current available water resources, but also planned future water resources that were going to be developed. It looked at a high-level future demand modeling, and I think we'll discuss the model a little bit and how that also gels back to what the figures are that Dieter will be reporting. And like I said, the strategic action plan that basically was going to try and force some action in terms of all the stakeholders, with the key stakeholders being the ministry and NamWater. Unfortunately, I don't think they are represented tonight. They were invited. And in the Upper Swakop Basin Management Committee, basically, in terms of the plan, I have a coordination role, but in terms of the management, Water Resource Management Act, we actually advisory role to the ministry and to the line functions in the ministry. Like I said, it's been in existence for the last 4 years. It's made up out of stakeholders inside the basin. So there's a number of these basin management committees. There's one for Maruru, for instance. If you drive into the town of Maruru, on the wall there of one of the buildings, it says the Maruru Basin Management Committee. It's their offices. They're quite strongly organized. There are some of them higher up in the north. And then we also have the transboundary structures like Orasakom and Okakom, the one for the Okavango River and the Orange Rivers. Maybe just a recap in terms of our current and future plans, where our water comes from. And it's quite a complex system if you think about it, because we've got water coming from the north in the karst area by a series of pipelines, eventually ending up in the canal, through the canal into Omatako Dam. From there, with a booster pump station being pumped in a pipeline to Von Bach Dam. Then we have the link between Von Bach Dam and Swakop Dam that can pump water either from Swakop to Von Bach or from Von Bach to Swakop. In our current situation, where Von Bach is so very empty, we probably have to start pumping from Swakop towards Von Bach. Swakop then supply Karibib with a major water user there being Navagap mine. And we'll talk a little bit about these water-intensive water users, water-intensive industries. And how they fit into some of the planning that we are doing or think are being done by government departments. Then we've got the supply to Windhoek, also the Windhoek aquifer that supplies Windhoek. We've got the CIS boreholes that supply towards the airport. And then we've also got the reuse initiatives, Windhoek being one of the pioneer cities in the world, basically, that have started reusing wastewater, treating our wastewater back to potable standard. So just in short, the system, it's been looking like this for quite a while. And we'll talk a bit about the opportunities that are there to improve on this. In terms of volumes that are available as supply, we've got the Omatako Dam that can give us probably in a good year 2 million cubic meters per annum. But it's not a very efficient dam. If you look at the brown block there, it's quite a lot of evaporation that goes out of that. We've got Swakop Dam that can give us 4.5 million cubic meters per annum, but
much less evaporation against the stored volume, so a much more efficient dam. Then Van Bach, obviously our most efficient dam because it's so deep, with a big volume, 6.5 million cubic meters and fairly low evaporation losses. Linked to that, we've got the Windhoek managed aquifer recharge system, where we actively can pump water back into the groundwater system and then pump it out again. So this have very low evaporation losses, and the idea is to try and get water from these sources into this system to reduce our losses. And then in times of very scarce water supply, we can then tap out of this. And I think Dieter will again touch more on this later on in terms of what will happen this year in terms of pumping from these borehole. Then we've got the Gorianga water reclamation plant and the new Gorianga plant, together giving us 8.6 million cubic meters. And then, the two together is 8.5. So the new one is 2.6. The old one gives us 6. And then the DPR2, the direct potable reuse, giving us 7 cubic meters per annum, million cubic meters per annum, and DPR3 giving us another 3. And all of this is giving us just enough to get by. If we start looking at some of the modeling, this is probably too little, and I think some of Dieter's figures will show us that as well, that there's a bigger risk for having a deficit year where we don't have enough water from these sources. Okay, so in terms, sorry, this is very slow. So in terms of the planning, how planning is done, it becomes quite complicated because there are so many role players that has to basically approve some of the plans, and that gets involved in the funding of these plans. And then there's role players that have political views around it, that also gets involved. So in short, you've got your line ministry. So you've got the Ministry of Urban and Rural Development that basically manages your municipalities. You've got Ministry of Agriculture, Water and Land Reform that runs the overall water resource, and also look at rural water supply. And then you've got the Ministry of Public Enterprises that runs NamWater. And then you've got NamWater that does the major share of bulk water supply in the country. In terms of the Water Resource Management Act, there's provision made for a water regulator. Because the Act's not active, we don't really have that regulator, and kind of that function de facto falls on the Basin Management Committee, but we don't really have the resources, and we also need the Act to really enable us to do our function. So yes, we are an entity in name, but probably not an entity in action. And then we've got the water users. So they the offtake. So it's your big industries, your small industries, and then us, Joe Block, the citizen of the country, that needs to use water to survive. And there's some interesting effects that comes passed down onto the users. A lot of them involve cost. And again, Dieter might speak a bit more about that. We've recently had a water pricing policy workshop. I don't know whom of you took part or were aware of it. It was announced publicly. It was advertised that you could comment on it in the local press. So there was a bit of stakeholder involvement there. In terms of the major points that came out during the study, during developing this integrated water resource management plan, is that all the current planning looks at augmentation, and it focuses on, here's the cursor. It looks at demand management, and I think Dieter will again talk a bit more about demand management. I'm not going to harp on that. But the reuse and the managed aquifer recharge, groundwater recharge, also featured quite highly. And there's a bit of scope there to still improve on that. But I think on the reuse side, we're also pretty much doing as much as we can. And if we go into drought situations, because there's a reduced return flow, we probably won't be able to get a lot of effect from that. And then optimization efficiency. Again, there's an opportunity there, but there's also a cost involved. So optimization efficiency is about getting our infrastructure in a situation where we have less unmetered losses. For instance, these burst pipes that's in the main street, or some of the losses between NamWater and the reservoirs inside Windhoek in those pipelines. So there's a bit of scope to fix that, but obviously there's a cost involved and we need capital. And one of the strategic goals seems to be to delay the spending of that capital, especially when it comes to the bulk water resource. And I think all of us know that we've been in dire need in the central area to get water from an alternative source other than those ones that I've just showed you on that other graphic. I think one of the newer things that has come into the thinking now is to have public-private partnerships. I think one of the most significant ones that's already operational is the Windhoek reuse, the reclamation plant. And there's obviously opportunity for more of these. There are funding constraints maybe to them. It's a new area of development, but I definitely think this is probably going to become a very strong feature of future interventions for water supply. So in terms of what's in the report and what was determined by those consultants when they started talking to the stakeholders is that in terms of the emergency water infrastructure plan, and this was initiated in 2017-18 when we had that really strong drought impact, was to improve the power supply for Kombat and Berg-Oka, so we can have a more uptime on the pumping, to have the Omatako van Bach pump stations refurbished, and to drill the Abena borels to have extra supply. There are obviously constraints to a lot of these, but the funding was available. The Abena borels are basically developed, but they're not really functional in terms of getting water back into the system. We also know that these borels, if they are pumped very hard, the recharge is very slow, so they really just for major emergency use. And that would link into the Eastern National Water Carrier. So it's this canal here, the picture. That's the canal that goes basically from just north of Kombat all the way to the Omatako Dam. The other part of the short-term planning is the NamWater bulk supply program. Again, featuring Kombat. So Kombat was part of the emergency plan. It's part of the bulk supply plan, specifically the power supply. But also maybe upgrading some of the pumping capacity and some of the canal capacity. The Van Bach Dam sluices, these were fixed. Some of the other equipment were rehabilitated, so at least those losses have been cut. And then the investigation into the medium-term water supply initiatives and getting consultants to look at sizing a reservoir for the Brakwater, Van Bach, Windhoek area. None of these interventions, I mean, they now regarded as short-term planning for our water scarcity, but it doesn't put water in our taps. It's kind of saying we will plan to plan, which is a bit frustrating. And this was 2 years ago, so not too much has happened since then. In terms of the medium plan, it becomes even more vague. So it says it will implement all augmentation sources with a 2 to 5 year implementation period, but it doesn't list those sources. There's continuous improvement in water use efficiency and upgrades of current systems. We know they've fixed the sluices. We know they've fixed some of the leaks on the canals and some of the pipelines. But the water use efficiency in terms of demand management, for instance, there's not a lot of scope in improving on that. Maybe in some of the other towns. So Windhoek is the major user. Maybe Okahania, Karibib might look at that. And there might be very small opportunities there. But a lot of that has already been done. And then the last one is reducing the water supply shortfalls in an 8 to 10 year period. So that looks potentially at the Abena borels that I've just mentioned. Maybe increasing some of the reuse opportunities. Maybe reducing losses by increasing the recharge, the artificial recharge back into the Windhoek aquifer. But it's fairly small and it's not really new water. It's water that we've already had in the system. The report lists quite a few challenges in terms of these plans that were reviewed. The first one is there's no clear decision or firm decision on the long-term solution. We all know, I think we've known, I think back even when I was in school, they already started talking about we need the next intervention to get extra water into the central area, and Windhoek will run out of water. And by being very smart in terms of how we use water and by forcing the citizens of Windhoek mostly, but the citizens of the central area to reduce their water use per capita, we've been able to defer this, but I don't think we can actually. There's quite a few presentations. Oh, sorry about this. Quite a few presentations that shows that we already had to have these interventions and have the water supply available by 2011. This report that was written 2 years ago said 2022, so we've missed the boat already 2 years down the line. And there's still no firm decision. We know there's some consultancies doing feasibility studies. There are again, no clear reports out in the public domain for review by somebody like our management committee to see if these make sense. Approval status of some of the plans are unclear. Like I said on the previous slide, they mention these plans 2 to 5 year implementation periods, but we don't know which they are. Have they been approved? Are there budgets available to do them? Stakeholder participation is lacking. At least we've now had the policy workshops for the pricing, and quite a strong turnout was at one of the workshops that I attended. The resourcing and funding is not clear on most of these plans, and it's quite critical to actually have that, to have the people available that can implement these plans, and to have the money available that will enable them to properly implement the plan. It doesn't show anything in terms of how those are linked to the plans. A lot of the interventions are, the wording they use in the report is pay-as-you-go budget availability. It's typically like we're running into a bit of a crisis this year, then some money will be made available and we'll upgrade some of the pumps, maybe to pump more water from Omatako or something like that. But there's no very clear stepwise planning available with budgets to properly make sure that we don't run into, let's put it this way, to ensure that we have better resilience against drought periods. The external water source, like I said, was needed a long time ago. This report, according to their modeling, was 2022. Some of the models that are available publicly from NamWater shows 2011. And some other models that were done by the previous government showed even earlier. The emergency response framework. So some of those short-term interventions I showed on the previous slides were initiated under the emergency response framework and initiated in 2017 and 18. And it's clear that these interventions are really not effective to solve our long-term problems. So the modeling showed a few things, and some of it they actually didn't get quite right, and I think Dieter's figures will also attest to that. But one of the things that definitely will happen, okay, so quite a few scenarios were modeled as part of the report outcome. I'm just going to focus on these two. So they're looking at normal conditions and drought conditions. They also looked at scenarios where, let's say, the karst area can't pump efficiently. What happens then? If the groundwater supply from the Windhoek boreholes are unavailable or only partially available, what happens then? So all of those what-if scenarios were also modeled and it's available in the report, but I think for time reasons, I'm just going to focus on these two because it's quite a clear indication that if we run from normal to drought conditions, the boreholes, this dark blue, the borehole contribution becomes much more. One of the things that I don't agree with in this graph, and I think Dieter as well will show it, is that they reckon if we go further down in time, there's a bigger opportunity to save water in terms of water demand management. I think it's actually inverse. We've pressured our citizens in this area so much to save water that I don't think there's that much as this gap indicates between. Okay, so maybe just to explain, this is not very easy to read. The dark line shows the projected water demand, with water demand management, and the gray line shows without water demand management, the projected demand. And they reckon the demand management opportunity is larger and becomes larger going down in time. I don't think it's quite like that. And it might actually be the other way around. It also says that the recovery from the second DPR will be quite a significant contributor in drought periods. But we've seen in the past during droughts that our grey water supply to these systems reduce because the total supply to the city and to the system reduces. So as the total contribution as a percentage might go up or might actually be so small that the plant runs dry. And I think Dieter has more experience of that. These models are just models. We need to accept that there are assumptions made in models and they're not always that accurate, but at least it gives us an indication what to expect into the future. And the one thing that it does say is that green on top there is definitely now needed. We need an external source, quite a significant source, probably anything from 5 million cubic meters per annum to 12, 15 cubic meters per annum is probably better, to give us at least that resilience for the next 10 to 15, 20 years maybe. And that's the conclusions from the modeling. And I think it kind of just reiterated what the NAM water model also have been saying to us for the last nearly 10 years now already, is our current water supply system is constrained. In fact, it's, I would say, significantly constrained. They use some milder wording there. The safety and resilience in the system is low. And Dieter will show you a graph as well that shows that we will have more and more frequent water supply constraints, and we will have more and more demand management interventions coming onto people in City of Windhoek area, but also probably in the wider central area in future. And there's a significant medium to long-term water security risk for the central area. And I think we've all known that. And the big question is, what is being done about it? And why is the public not involved and being told what's happening? I share the concern raised earlier that there's so few people here. I think one would have thought people living in Windhoek would really be worried about the water situation. We know there's no water coming in, but there's no daily water bulletin, for instance, in our newspapers on the front page showing Von Bach Dam has dropped from 27 to 25% in a month's time. To start creating that awareness, and that's one of the reasons we've decided to have this presentation today, is we need to start create this awareness, and we need to try and get the citizenry to get involved and to start demanding from the powers that be that they give us answers and that they start implementing the plans, because we've had plans since the late 80s already to really have the significant water supply resource from outside coming in. Sorry. Where are we now? Okay. Sorry, man. Okay, just Okay, so in terms of the modeling outcome, it looked at management options in the short term and the long term. It didn't look at the medium term so much. In terms of the short term, I've mentioned before, they say that yes, the reuse system have some limited opportunity there that we can expand on. The quality of effluent. Now, this is one of the interesting things that I haven't spoken about earlier, is the quality of the water that are being discharged. Any water that gets discharged in this basin eventually could end up in Swakop and most probably will end up in Swakop Dam, which is currently our major source that we will rely on. Between that and the boreholes, we will probably be relying on very heavily in the next few months. So the more pollution that ends up in there, the poorer the quality of the water, the more expensive it becomes to treat it, or it might actually mean that we might have to change our treatment infrastructure. So a lot of emphasis should probably be starting to being put on this. Also looking at water intensive industries that are settling and still wanting to develop in the central area, but there's most probably not enough water available for them in the first place. And in the second place, they will have an effluent impact, because if you use a lot of water, that water usually goes through some sort of process and comes out different from the water that came in. So unless they internalize cleaning that water, we might end up externalizing the cost of paying for the effluent discharge. We also know, and the Upper Swakop Basin Management Committee has had 2 sessions with the department about the water quality standards not being adhered to by wastewater works discharging into this basin. And they are aware of it. We are aware of it. I think a lot of the public are aware of it, because there were a few newspaper articles that came from those meetings. But the feedback is that they still are not 2 years later compliant with the effluent standards. And it's going to be a slow process. They're following, I don't know, maybe quite the diplomacy as some part of it, and also trying to not force the cost onto these wastewater works to really comply. But the long-term impact downstream hasn't been properly modeled, and I believe could be significant. And that's one of the things that came out in the long-term planning here as well. You'll see in the last bullet. And then obviously expansion of our recharge system. We know we can reduce our losses. You remember that those blue and brown blocks that I showed earlier, the significant losses that we still have in terms of evaporation. If we can get the active recharge back into the aquifer, we can reduce some of those losses. Again, but this is limited because the aquifer is just that big. So we can store that much water and then that stops. So in the medium term, in the short term, that's obviously an opportunity. In the long term, the big question is what will be the new source? Because we all know there will need to be a new source. So only 2 sources are mentioned in the report. It's the Okavango, which we know there have been quite extensive planning done in the late 80s, 90s, and early 2000s of how to get that water to the central area. And then more recently, it looked at the desalination plant at the coast and potentially getting that desalinated seawater to the central area. One of the other things that in terms of management options is that the operating rules becomes very complex. It's already quite complex, and it will become more and more complex as we add to the system. So we really need a very strong management function, and we need that very convoluted picture I showed you in terms of the planning with the line ministries and the municipalities, and that needs to be simplified under a strong management function so we can start speaking out of one voice, so that if a water-intensive industry is applying to develop in Windhoek, and the City of Windhoek says, listen guys, we don't have water, that they don't go to Okanya and then get permission to develop there, but they still reliant on the same water resource. Multi-stakeholder working group will probably be needed. It came out quite strongly in the stakeholder engagement for this report. It could potentially be the Swakop Basin Management Forum, which is made up out of 52 stakeholders already. Or it could be an alternative or overlapping working group. But some sort of stakeholder working group will definitely be needed that can give input. We've got a lot of expertise sitting in the private sector, and we can tap from that if it's managed correctly in one of these working groups. Accurate real-time data and information is needed, and it needs to be an early warning system. So in November already, when we started seeing the climatic forecasts might not be that good, and then in December we started seeing rainfall is not that good, and then in January it gets confirmed. That we start intervening then already, and not wait until we have the CAN workshop in June, and half of the horses have bolted already. You can still close the gate, and obviously there are interventions, but if we have another drought year next season, how do we manage it then? And if we then wait till June again before we start taking action, how does that influence the water supply? We know that NamWater does have a fairly accurate model that they run. And at the CAN workshop, they will probably present those scenarios for the next 3 and 5 years and looking at low and high rainfall. But the early warning and quick reaction, I think, is definitely lacking. And they listed it here as a long-term need. I think it's actually a short to medium-term need. And then a real-time water and salt balance, again, talking to the water quality issues. Where are all the pollution going at the moment? We know Goriangap Dam is pretty much unusable under our current management regime because it's too polluted. Was it possible to put management measures in place to prevent that? Most probably yes, but we didn't react and now it's too late. Will the same happen to Swakop Poort? Let's hope not, but we did see during that significant drought year when we started pulling down into the dead storage that the water quality really was starting to get bad. Luckily, we've had very high inflows and quite a bit of dilution. Okay. So this is my last slide, so I won't bore you much more. This is just a strategic action plan. I'm not going to go through all of it, but I think what is important that it was built on 4 pillars. So there's an infrastructure agenda, and infrastructure needs funding to be maintained and also for new infrastructure to be built. And I'm just going to focus, so the top bullet of each of these are what was ranked during the workshops that were done as the most pressing issue to solve in the strategic plan to make a significant gain. So the long-term bulk supply, and I've mentioned it a few times now, we need that major source from outside of the central area to make sure that we are having that resilience. The tariff structure, we know that our current tariff structure does not recover the funds that are needed to make sure that we have effective maintenance, that we put some money aside for future expansion, for future capital expenses, and maybe looking at some sort of subsidy, if needed, from government to help the guys that cannot afford the real pricing, if you want to call it that, to still have water supply available. In terms of legislation, under the Operational Excellence Agenda, getting the Act to be implemented. I think significant gains have been made. Feedback from the department recently was that the minister only have 2 issues now with the Act that he wants resolved, and they might even enact the Act without those being resolved and immediately just then do some amendments to it. So maybe we are lucky, and before the tenure of the current minister ends, we can have the Act, the Water Resources Management Act, the one from 2013, that's been gathering dust in place. And that will help us with the water regulator and a whole bunch of these other things that follows onto it. Maybe just to focus on it, it says a functional water regulator. So it's also no use if we have a water regulator in name, but they don't really do the function that they were appointed for. Okay, and then in terms of the community engagement, it's about awareness creation, which features fairly low on the priority list, but this is the only thing we can currently do under our mandate in terms of our structure and yeah, what the Act allows us to do. But capacity building will always be there, I think, in the private sector as well as in government. Getting some alliances. I mean, 2 of our major alliance partners are not here today. Some of the things that came out is urban agriculture and women and water in terms of getting food security and a bit of a safety net. All of these will probably have to be unpacked a bit more to understand if they are feasible, but they were raised in the workshops and they were listed as stuff that can be done. I think I'm going to leave it there for now. And Dieter, I think we're going to allow 1 or 2 questions, and then Dieter can present, and then we'll have a lot of questions after that, if that's fine. Okay. Any questions on what I've just said? Anything from the Zoom side? Nothing. Okay.
We have got some serious problems, political. First of all, why don't the government stop all these people from the neighboring countries to come and flood Namibia? They're using Windhoek water. They don't pay. They're using want electricity. We haven't got it. Industrialization. We want to develop, create work. We can't. Capital is the biggest problem. We must stop inflow from the neighboring countries, send these people back. We haven't got enough schools, hospitals. Money which is created goes into these developments instead of looking for water resources. And what I don't like is you have got a fantastic layout, but you ignore totally the Atlantic Ocean. We will have to look at it. I know capital is a problem, but there is no way out. Forget the Okavango water. Botswana already has got the United Nations going to stop Namibia from using Okavango water. It is not yet high politically, but they are busy working on it. And I really would like to see in your group people starting to look at feasibility studies, Atlantic Ocean. The water is there. I know the problem is the pumping all the way up. And as we had it in the newspapers, Botswana is also interested in Atlantic water. So let's combine the two countries and see if we can't find solutions. And as you mentioned very well, the rainy seasons is also a big problem. We can't do anything about it.
Yes, I think that's okay. Yeah, no, that's noted. I agree with you. I mean, desalination is probably the most resilient resource. It is expensive. We understand that. And I think we need to start thinking smartly of how we can sort out the expenses. So you've mentioned cross-border agreements. We also know that Angola has significant say on what happens to the Okavango River because it starts there. Yeah, so it becomes quite tricky when you have these transboundary resources that you want to tap into. So I agree 100% with what you're saying. Yes.
Pete, on one of your slides, you showed future strategic plans, and one of them was iceberg usage. In 1993, I was a leader of a team looking for a new harbor on the Atlantic Ocean. And needless to say, we've only got old harbors now belonging to a foreign power, no names, no pactoral. And one of the options for water supply was dragging an iceberg up from the Antarctic and dewatering it, milking it, as it were. Is anything being done at looking at that? I can tell you that I've got colleagues in South Africa and internationally in Chile, who are doing exactly that already. So, to add to what the previous speaker said, maybe that's something to look at. A further point is we were looking at collecting fresh water at the mouth of the Orange River and shipping that up. My question is anything being done about that? Bottom line, yes, you're right. Many, many problems for water. Water is life. But we are winners in this country. So think about it, please.
Yeah, just to both your questions. In terms of the Orange River, the Orange River is overutilized already. It ran dry quite a few times in the recent history. So I think, especially in drought times, your option of harvesting water at the mouth and shipping it up might not work. But it is something to think of, maybe higher up in upstream. Again, we've got the cross-border thing. So we've got Lesotho, we've got South Africa, we've got Namibia, all partnering on managing it. So there is a management committee as Orasacom that's managing that. They also look at the groundwater. So for maybe interest's sake, the Stampriet issue here, the groundwater basin also falls into the Orasacom area. So there are cross-border structures that can look at it. Then in terms of the icebergs, it was looked at during the Cape Town water crisis. A lot of the cost is not feasible. But, and we further up the coast, so pulling it all the way up here is even further. Yeah, no, it's obviously something to think about, but it wasn't developed in more detail. So that slide was just during the brainstorming event. All of those things were put on the thing. So I thought I'll just put it there so people can see that there was a bit of wider thinking, but we still fall back to the desalination. There is probably a third option. Looking at the dams in the south, we spoke about Neckartal just before. It's very far away. It is part of some of the feasibility studies. Again, a lot of this is not in the public domain, so I'm not 100% certain what is currently being studied in terms of feasibility studies. We know the desalination plant was looked at in quite a bit of detail. There's a high-level impact assessment, environmental impact assessment that was done. So quite a few things were done around the desalination plant. A little bit was done around the Okavango. I don't know what was done around the dams in the south. The rumors that I've heard and informal conversations says it's really not feasible. It's too far away. It's a lot of water, but it's too far away, and the dams that are closer are not big enough to really make an impact. Okay, I think we're going to take one more question, and then Dieter can talk, and then we can have more afterwards.
I noticed that the new external resources is only Kavango, but the report didn't say anything about the harvesting of rainwater. For example, this year, the whole north is full of water, but with all the earth dam, they are no more working in that area. They have been working before, but now there is nothing. And the same as you go to Zambezi, every time people are shifted to another places, water is wasted. If we could use that water, then we will limit water which is running for animals and for people, instead of them to use that water from the earth dam. But they didn't mention anything about it.
Yes, I agree with you. One of my personal, I've done a few studies on it, is on water harvesting. So also, I mean, we're looking at artificial recharge of the aquifers, but there might be interventions that will allow improved natural recharge, which is a form of water harvesting. And then also putting, I mean, in the Sahel and in the Negev deserts, they do a lot of water harvesting that they use for permaculture, where they cultivate fruit trees using natural water harvesting techniques. So I agree with you. It's definitely something to look at. Okay, I think.
Thank you very much. Mr. Tolkien, your turn.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a great honor to stand here amongst people that are interested regarding to the water supply. Water is a definite challenge for us. Now, the background, water demand management is the concept to provide a fair distribution of water. And it also gives the opportunity for people to make a change for themselves. Now, in the past, water was seen as a resource that is plentiful, and that is not the case anymore. It requires responsible use of a shared resource. And the previous speaker indicated very clearly that there is great confusion amongst politicians and also businessmen that consider the water that has been saved by individuals to reduce their demand, that they believe they can now use it for business development. That is definitely a confusion. So what we have achieved, and that is the doing of the community. We have dropped our water demand down to 140 liters per person per capita. Now, what that means is in Cape Town, we are around 200 to 220 liters per capita. So this is already quite an achievement. We will look at it just now again. And therefore, if we want to take it further, water management and water efficiency is definitely the way to go. And there's a lot of a fair scope for it, but it requires from here on not the effort of the people, but investment by the people. So now that red line that you see there is how over time we reduced our water demand, and here's 140 liters per capita. We are a bit over it again, and the resources are indicated. Now here we can see in 2019, we pumped just over 8 million cubic meters out of our aquifer, the Windhoek aquifer. It was the highest abstraction of the aquifer at that time. And that was possible because of the deeper and new boreholes that were drilled. We see also at the top, the reclaimed water that we achieved by the reclamation plant. And then NamWater has supplied us as the water in the dams were available. Now, the sad story about the situation is we are at the end of the pipeline, so we get the rest of the water in Windhoek. So, just a matter of interest, what has water demand management brought us and what we have achieved, the community that is sitting here and the community out there achieved this. If you look at the red line, that is where we are today. And if you look at the brown line, that was the line in 2016, 13. So we saw that there was a lot of wastage in the beginning. Then we need to remember that also the quantity of water and meters that were available were less. So we have an increase. But we had a lot of losses at the end, which are not there anymore. So what you have seen is that the consumption graph has compacted at the end and compacted to the beginning of the graph. So people are consuming more conservative and more controlled. And that is what we have achieved. And that you can see, for example, how the consumption has changed in these areas. There's a bit of theory about it, how it can be further improved. So there is room for improvement, but it takes a little more effort to achieve that. So yes, now what we have done is we have taken it according to some of the townships, and people always say in certain areas water is not saved so well as in our areas, and let's take some responsibility to what the situation is all over town, all townships. The community has achieved significant savings. And yeah, what is interesting, in certain areas, we had shared water. So a person had a water meter and he shared to other households his water. And now the tariff changed. So we saw that this one dropped tremendously. So the shared water consumption has changed. That's why there's a significant drop. There's just some of the interesting things. Elisenheim, we see a growth in water demand. That is the only township where we see a growth in water demand. And that is, in my opinion, a combination of two things. Is the township is growing. There's building work, and obviously it is establishing still. So if you have a house in the beginning, you don't have gardens, so you develop a garden and so on. So that is the growth effect. That is the only township where you see a growth effect. All other townships have a demand reduction. So that is quite well to say. And then we see your target lines, 12 and 18 cubic meters per household, which is also interesting to see in which areas do we see a higher and a lower impact. And that has also sometimes to do with the intensity of the people per household, how many people are there, then also gardening, and then the distribution between smaller units and larger units. So it just gives you just a good idea that water is safe throughout the city. Now, in order to save water, we talk about water efficiency. And one of the things that I personally believe in a lot is to replace a water toilet. The interesting thing about a toilet is how old is a toilet normally in a house? It is between 20 and 50 years you keep a toilet in a house. In government buildings, it's even longer. Now, the question is, how long do you drive a car? You know, you drive a car 5, 10 years. If it gets 20 years, you definitely put it as an old timer, and you see it as a good car to keep in that way. But it's not a normally used car anymore. Now, a toilet, the efficiency of a toilet, to replace a toilet, you can buy a proper water efficient toilet, and the regulations say in 1996 the regulation was put together, and they say a toilet should not flush more than 6 liters. Okay, but let's don't fool ourselves. If you now want to buy a toilet, make sure that it doesn't flush more than 4.5 liters for full capacity. And therefore your toilet, if you replace it, it will, just by the water you save, your investment of the toilet will be recovered within 3 years probably. So the question is, why don't invest in something wise? Drive your car a year longer, replace your toilet. And then water efficient taps. So what it shows is, previously, let's say for 4 people, you consumed 10 liters, 10 cubic meters a month for water. If you do water efficiency, almost half of it we will consume now, 6 liters. Now, that is the way we want to go. Now, totally right what was mentioned there. You make your systems more water efficient, so what happens? There's less wastewater, so your reclamation plant receives less water. But the thing is, it's the right way to do it, because the quantity of water that you obtain and that reaches the reclamation plant again will be probably 50%. Because your sewer plant achieves, if your system works well, it obtains 60% of the water. By the time reclamation takes place or it reaches the reclamation plant, only 50% of the water will be there. So if you save water, 50% water here, half of the water that you save, the whole city saved anyway. So it's a benefit. So, but it has two sides of the story. So yes, saving water will also have a challenge on the reclamation. These are the concepts. Measure is to know. If you want to do water management, this is the procedures to follow. First of all, you need to measure your water regularly. We recommend weekly water management. You see, Cape Town still talks about account management. Account management is once a month, and you get your account 1.5 to 2 months later from what the reading was. So if you had a leak, you are now unsure, and it was already running for 1.5 months, and now you get a reading on your account with a big bill, and now you become unsure. Should I do something? Should I do nothing? And that creates more confusion and cost. If you do water management by reading your water meter weekly, you don't get a big bill, because you will not be confused, because the water meter will tell you there is a problem. So that is the right way to go. So once you know what is happening at your home, you can do proper actions and planning and benefits, and you can also measure it properly, the benefits that or your investment that you applied. So that is what it all comes from. And then also reuse and recycle. Huh? So measure is to know. So this is just talking about the challenges for this year. And what I try to show in this graph is I want to bring clarity to the confusion. People think we have a lot of water for a long time already, and with the same resources that we have been sitting for a long time. But the situation is as such that US people have saved water, although the increase of population went quite up. We have a 3% growth, a 30% growth over a period of 10 years. So 3% growth annually. And over 10 years, 30% water has to be produced to sustain that growth. That production has not been taking place for many years. So we are in a serious deficit. And if people invest in water-intensive industries, they make a serious mistake to do it in the central area. So this gray area shows that the risk of running out of water becomes bigger and bigger. And that we especially are going to see in the coming year. We definitely have a serious deficit. And let's continue to the next slide. Now, what I've overexposed on the demand levels is the dam levels. This green line is the dam levels. It just shows you how the dam levels fluctuated. It's still the same resources. Since the 1980s, we still sit basically with the same resources. Okay, some resources, you can see how the resources were added at the top. East National Water Carrier, this is definitely a resource that came in. The bore system is a resource, but it's an emergency resource. We it's balancing the water supply. So with other words, if the dam levels are high, we pump in here's the recharge that has been done in the aquifer in the past history. And we did very well in 2021. 2022, we stopped because our aquifer was actually recovered very well. So for 2023, this coming year, our aquifer is well replenished. So for the coming season, we should be okay. But we are in a serious shortage of water regarding to surface water. And this was a month ago or a while back. We are changed the consumption. It's actually 25% now from Bach Dam, which is a crisis in the sense that if you draw the water level too far down, then your biosystem in the dam is damaged. So a lot of fish die off, and it creates a lot of other problems with it. Now, at that time, NamWater approached us, the technical staff, and said, we need to pump 8.5 million. Recently, they said 8.5 is not enough. We need to now pump 9.5 million. So we are going to pump much more than we have ever pumped before, which is a good thing. We need to challenge and understand how our aquifer is operating, but we need to also realize that we are in a serious deficit of water regarding to surface water resources. So that is the situation. Here we see where we pumped in 2019, just 8.5. Okay, and then it's 9.5 million. Yeah, that is the situation in a nutshell. So water saving is definitely a benefit for all consumers because we need to be responsible. We are sharing, there are more and more people sharing the same resources. And the challenge comes also in our current infrastructure is getting older. That needs to be replaced at some time. If we are bringing new resources in, the current infrastructure might be too small. We need to add infrastructure to bring water to the city. So the existing pipework might be too small. So there's a lot of challenges that come with it and a lot of costs that come with it. And existing infrastructure that need maintenance as well. So the current system is challenged by the current infrastructure itself already. Now we want to say, okay, we need more infrastructure. The cheapest method is take your industry and take the people where the water is. That is the solution. The central area is a location for administration. It's a central administrative area. It is not a capital city like we know it in London, where the big river runs through. We don't have it in the central area. And what will happen is if we mismanage it, the government will invest a lot of money into the central area to supply water. The cost will become very high and businesses will move away and you are sitting with the cost. Who's going to pay those things? Then you say, okay, now the people that are staying there, they have to pay now these costs of the water. Then they say, I cannot afford it. Then they move away as well. So we will have like a lost city at the end of the day. So we need to do a smart consideration of investments. And one of the most important thing is industries must understand investment in the central area is a no-go on long-term basis. So I think with that, I conclude. Thank you very much.
I think we're quickly going to do questions and answers. So both of you, please come to the front again. I'll gladly hand out the mic. one of the things that I now saw on the presentation, you said saving is the way to go. I personally am at a point, I got away with a pool, I don't have a lawn, I'm only washing full wash machine loads, my water only flushes 4 or 5 liters, I'm only boiling the water that I need, yada, 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 yada. I'm at a point where if I start saving even more, it's going to influence my well-being. So I kind of feel that I'm at a max. I don't know how many people, other people in the hall or other Windhoekers feel like that already. Is there really so much more that can be saved? I mean, obviously, yes, we can shower once a week. I believe that other people are not going to like it that much. But is there really that much more that Windhoek can save on the consumer side? If I see the graph from before, that our lowest point was 140 liters before and is now 143. I mean, that is so close. Is there more one can do?
The question is very valid. The interesting thing about the people in this room is these people are the people that are concerned and make the effort to make the change and have implemented the change already. We need to remember that there is a lot of scope still beyond yourself that haven't implemented those elements yet. And as I said, to invest in a water efficient toilet, in my opinion, it's a thing that nobody thinks of. It's like you have mentioned before, the treatment plant of wastewater. People all want wastewater treatment plant because they want to reuse their water again. But they don't want to pay the maintenance on it. They don't want to maintain it. But everybody drives a car. But this clever thing about a car is there's a maintenance plan built into it. So for the first 5 years, it's part of your payment system. Perhaps that is the way you have to do it. But the thing is, a waste management plant, its lifespan is beyond that of a normal car. If your car gets older, you give it to you sell it again or whatever. But a waste management plant has a lifespan of 20 years plus. Now, for water management, if you talk in Europe about water management, what is the lifespan of water management? How long do they plan ahead? Do you have an idea? They talk about 50 to 100 years. We plan 5 years ahead. So that is where the challenge lies. And so there is scope, yes, because especially in the public sector, a lot of buildings are not to standard yet and haven't implemented the management systems yet. So I think we can still improve, but obviously for those that have implemented water efficiency, there you come to a limit. Thank you.
There's a question on the Zoom chat that refers to the DPR2, DPR3 from Arnold Bittner, saying that they're not operational. Is that correct, Dieter? The DPRs? No, the DPR, the direct potable reuse 2 and 3. Because it's still in the planning. Okay, so that's where that figure comes from. So Arnold, yes, they're not operational yet, but they are in the planning, and there's also budget. They are developing them.
There's a second reclamation plant. Yeah. Yes, there's a second reclamation plant that is definitely in the pipeline. It has its valids because there are certain wastewater plants where the water is not really reused yet. Only Gamamps has been reused, and that is the Windhoek reclamation plant that we know now. Yes.
And then the next comment that he made is that the Abena borels, to his knowledge, has not been drilled. I understood that some of them were drilled, but they're definitely not equipped and they're definitely not supplying yet. And it again show that this integrated resource management plan has so many role players, and NamWater, which is pretty much the custodian, could have been here to answer some of those questions. But thank you, Arnold, for highlighting that.
Yeah, Abenap, as said, is an emergency supply, and it has also other capacities. I'm as far as I know, NAM Water is strongly working on that, and yeah, it might become up and running for the season. Yeah.
Thank you. After COVID, I think Windhoek have big problem. We have now a contradiction between the need of food and the need to save water. There was that promotion that everyone should have backyard gardens. And you are telling us we have to save water. Now, which one we should follow? Should we do our backyard food, vegetables, and all this? And most of this is done in informal settlement, where maybe people are not even getting water on prepayment. Maybe it is a common tap, which is leaking water every time one comes, another one go, they are going to do their gardens so that they can get their own food. What is City of Windhoek is doing about it?
Once again, that is a difficult question. As people with a low income try to establish a stable lifestyle and producing their own food, I think at the end of the day, the balance will find itself. You will see how much it is. If you have to pay for your water, you will see how much water are you willing to put into your garden, and is it not cheaper to buy your food? So I think the balance is partly already established, and it may be further established if there becomes less reclaimed water available for gardening. At this stage, we promote reclaimed water for parks and for these farming. We do not support the use of drinking water for gardening because it is a scarce resource. But once again, if you reuse your water, let's say your kitchen water, to reuse it and to water your plant, that is within a limited framework. So that's why I say it will balance itself out, yes.
What about water tanks? If you should have a water tank at least and water your garden with that.
Okay, rainwater harvesting. Rainwater harvesting is a contradictive resource, because as you know, we have more or less 3 months of rain and the rest of the year is dry. Now, yes, it's the most effective harvesting of rainwater is rainwater harvesting directly in a tank. And as we know, 3% of the water that runs off reaches the aquifer. And if we are lucky, some of the water remains then in the dams if the downpour was strong enough. So rainwater harvesting has its value, but once again, coming back to the lady that wanted to do gardening, gardening is only valuable in the rainy season, because then the moisture is as such that the plants do well. Now, if you have a harsh, dry season, your plants will suffer just by the dry air alone. So you will have to water it so much more. So it really becomes not beneficial to have a garden unless you have it under shade or so. So it becomes a limited situation. But yes, everything is at its own level.
Saves water. What about those people, your neighbors, that have got a huge green lawn? And I mean, they've got pretty flowers and a big green lawn. We've got nothing like that. We've got, I don't water the garden. And still, that looks nice.
Yes. Once again, currently the tariff structure allows still a fair use of water, because currently we are on the normal water tariff, which says up to 30 cubes you can consume under the normal tariff, and up to 50 cubes you can consume before there's the normal tariff, the high tariff, and then the penalty tariff. Well, we call it two penalties. I would like to see it that it's a high consumption tariff and then a penalty. If those tariffs are better brought into perspective for the consumer balance, then if a person wants to really have that green garden and he has to pay a proper fee for the water that he consumes, he will contribute for the maintenance and the installation of new pumps and pipelines that we need, and that we can keep the lower tariffs at a cheaper rate. It might be okay, but it will be a conflict of interest to the public, and the public will start talking to the guy and say, hey, I don't like what you're doing. So you will have these kind of things, yeah.
But I mean, they can only afford it as long as there is water.
Yeah, it shows that the tariff structure needs to revise as well. So yeah, we will look into that probably over time as well.
Isn't she suggesting maybe, and this is a difficult word, policing? Policing, you go around to these embassies, for example, and their lawns are expansive, beautifully green, and they don't pay a cent because they're guests in our country. Policing and communication is what is needed. And I think you are pointing towards that, aren't you?
Yeah, I think that at the end of the day, it will be a public matter. And I do know that also some of the embassies has actually removed the pools because of the water situation. Some of them did. What I try to say is there are always two sides. And the bigger the side grows of the people that become more responsible, the smaller, the more the irresponsible people will feel not at ease, and they will step down as well. So it's a natural process. It's like if the cost of water becomes too much in Windhoek, well, I will move out. Because you can live cheaper elsewhere, and businesses will also move out. So it's a natural process, and that is what I try to say is the decision makers need to be careful what to do. So I think in some way there is sense in the process not to invest in these big water supply systems, and rather indirectly promote decentralization.
I think that's one of the things that also came out in the study that was done by Began. A lot of plans, and then it's a plan to plan. So we just go in the circle of planning to do more plans. Just one of the things that in California, I was there on an exposure visit a few years ago, where they started paying some of the people in Los Angeles to rip up their lawns and put in water-wise gardens. But obviously it's a municipality that has the funds to do that, just to reduce the water demand.
Here's one more question from the chat from Esther Gustavo. Is the water from Combat Mine not an option? Is the water from Combat Mine not an option?
Yeah, so Combat Mine is already being pumped. The last time I was there, they were pumping it at 1,500 cubic meters per hour, I think. So it's definitely already there. Some of the emergency funding that was available was to increase or to secure the power supply, so they could have a more efficiency in terms of the pumping. But it's definitely an option. That water, unfortunately, does go into the canal that we know does have quite a bit of losses, and there's most probably an opportunity to fix the canal to reduce those losses. But Combat Mine is already being pumped, and there's definitely an opportunity to pump more from there if they want to start mining in the underground sections. But I think the bottleneck is downstream in terms of the canal.
Let's recap, what is the long-term plans?
So again?
The long-term plans for water. Long-term plans for
Okay,
water.
the only two plans that were listed in that report that I've referred to was the desalination plant at the coast, pumping desalinated water to the central area, and looking at water supply from the Kavango River via the current existing, the canal I've just mentioned, to Omatako and then to Von Bach. There are stories doing the rounds that they are looking at the south, but there's very few official reports that show that they've now done these feasibilities and that the desalination plant is definitely the one we're going to go for, or the Kavango, which we know have got a lot of constraints and will become more constrained probably in future because of biodiversity, or the south, which we know Neckartal is now full. It's a massive body of water, the biggest dam in Namibia, and it's just lying there. So, yeah, all of those are mentioned at times. We know there was quite a detailed study done on the desalination option, but I haven't seen the final report or anything. But those are the options that are currently investigated. Does that answer your question? There's no time frames. That's I mean, we don't know. There's no budgets allocated. I mean, we've just had the budget speech. We've heard they're going to buy some farms to do irrigation from Neckartal, but we didn't see anything around water.
I just quickly wanted to confirm, rumor had it that the aquifers were not recharged under Windhoek because of too high expenses, but in your presentation you said they were in fact recharged. So Windhoek aquifers are at the moment pretty much full. Ah, that's comforting. And the other thing that I wanted to know, again, rumor has it that the Swakop has received quite a lot of polluted water. How true is that, number one? Number two, is the water still possibly to use for Windhoek use at the moment, or is the pollution now really becoming a problem?
So the water is still usable, but there is, over time, we've seen increases in certain elements in the water. And that's the worrying effect. That's why I've mentioned that the quality management is definitely something we need to pay more attention to, which really hasn't been looked at.
Yes, what the Swakop Dam does, it closes the drainage of pollutants. And that means that the salination, the salt content increases constantly. So you want to minimize the salt development in the central area because it cannot wash out anymore because the dam blocks the flow. So pollution has two sides of it. One is the normal pollution that you can kind of filter out, but if your water becomes too saline, you have to desalinate.
Peter, the Koroyanga Dam, as we believe it's for human consumption, no-go. Are there any industrial users or companies make use of the water at the moment?
Yes, the city does make use of it. We use it as a part of a resource for providing these semi-purified water for irrigation. So yes, it is used, and it's also used as a filter to prevent extensive downstream contamination for the Swakop Dam. So it has actually two functions, yes.
Okay. As we have got such a lot of road construction around Windhoek, Okahania, railroad plant, can't these construction companies be forced to use only Goriangap Dam water instead of using our drinking water?
We promote the use of semi-purified water, yes. So with other words, Goriangap Dam water is used through the semi-purified water that we provide.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so the answer is yes.
All right. Thank you very much for today's presentation, this evening's presentation. I think it's answered a lot of questions. Unfortunately, also made us aware of major shortcomings, especially for the upcoming season, seeing that the forecast for next year isn't that blue either. Thank you very much, and good night.
Thank you.